I hate to be the one to tell you, I really do, but compassion is going to require it all of us. It's going to take all that you have to give, more than you thought you had in you to draw on. In Christian circles, I know that we tend to use the word compassion as kind of a warm fuzzy. It's sort of a sweet, gentle emotion. It's all kindness and soft-heartedness towards other people. But that really sells the word short. It's much more honest to acknowledge, just like Jesus did, that compassion is a form of grit. It's a combination of passion and persistence that you don't just get to feel, but choose to think and act. Today wraps up a week in the Disciples of Christ life, where we focus on something called Week of Compassion. That's both a span of time and the name of a helping agency. It is our international, local, national, and international helping agency set aside to distribute funds and be helpers in the wake of global, natural, and humanitarian disasters. So any money that's raised during the 1 week we focus on Week of Compassion then helps fund projects for the entire next year. This year's theme for the whole effort is called Heard and Seen. That's why you see it behind you. And those words, heard and seen, did speak to me. They lodged somewhere inside, and I have to acknowledge that that very phrase is the one that guides today's whole message. It occurs to me that Jesus often talks about those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. That's one heard and seen tie-in. But Jesus wasn't talking about seeing and hearing as two of the five senses. He means those who can grasp truths bigger than themselves. Jesus is talking about people who are willing to see life differently and to hear words that are difficult to take in. And some of the very hardest words that Jesus lays out for any who would come after him happen to fall right where we left off a week ago. We've been reading from Luke chapter 6 lately, and it gives us this account of Jesus coming down from a mountain to preach to a crowd on the level, on a flat plain where everyone was equal. Jesus starts with some blessings and woes that we talked about last Sunday. These are two seemingly opposite conditions, but really also a reality check for what's happening in any one population at any given time and place. There is shouting and there is weeping, all in the same group of people. There is sorrow to be met, and anyone who follows Jesus is going to meet it. Then, as part of that very same sermon, Jesus is still preaching. He leads the crowd into even more daunting territory. Here we go, into the deeper water. This is the Common English Bible reading from Luke chapter 6, starting at verse 27. But I say to you who are willing to hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, offer the other one as well. If someone takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt either. Give to everyone who asks, and don't demand your things back from those who take them. Treat people in the same way that you want them to treat you. If you love those who love you, why should you be commended? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, why should you be commended? Even sinners do that. If you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, why should you be commended? Instead, love your enemies. Do good and lend expecting nothing in return. If you do, you will have a great reward. You will be acting the way children of the Most High act. For he is kind to ungrateful people and wicked people. Be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. If, for you, the blessings and the woes of last week sounded anything like a call to full revolt, and complete social upheaval. If it seemed like those two sets of pronouncements were pitting the rich against the poor or the poor against the rich, well, Jesus clears that up right away. Because the very next words he says, after woe to you, are love your enemies. In a sermon that is not about ending up ahead of the other guy, in a gospel that's the very opposite of you should be first and most prosperous, Jesus starts his toughest assignment with these words, love your enemies. In journalism, I would have called that not burying the lead. That is like bringing the most dramatic point first. Here you are, right away, saying the thing that's most likely to startle or offend, maybe to grab attention. You lead with the statement that's most different from all expectations. Soon after love your enemies, Jesus also says something that we like to quote, treat people in the same way that you want them to treat you. Probably, that more used phrase was just an example for how to live out that first hard assignment. And it was a pretty good example. Offering others the same treatment that we want is pretty easily understandable to people. Also, that was an idea already out there in the culture. Other philosophies and even earlier religions had similar ethics circulating. Greek thinkers and Hebrew rabbis both had already said things in writing like, what you wouldn't want, don't go do. Jesus takes it a little different direction here. What he says is not a don't, but a go ahead and do. It's not a negative rule that he's talking about, but a positive rule, a call to action to make more of our preferred conditions in the world. Go ahead and do the good thing that you'd want. Just make it done for someone else. So good on Jesus. The Christian golden rule expands virtuous behavior from an absence of bad to the presence of good. It's a nice thing. That's worth a lot. But what Jesus is doing in this sermon goes far beyond that, even beyond that really good thing. Because by the end, Jesus is not only saying, do unto others as you would do, but he's saying, you do as God would do. And that's a whole different level. Be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate. You might have heard it in another translation, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. This referencing the God who sends rain to the righteous and the unrighteous alike, who is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. God who so loves the world that God refuses to condemn it, that instead is saving it in the whole. That's the God we're talking about. And following that way seems beyond any human capacity. But that's exactly what Jesus is invoking when he commands an agape kind of love. A quick little side note to do a word study. Have you heard the term agape? It's Greek, and it's Greek for one specific type of love. So in English, we just have the word love for all the big, strong emotions we feel towards all the things, towards our life partners and our children and that pair of boots that fits really great. It's all just love, right? But other languages, they do it better. They have multiple words for love of different kinds. And this works because, like we all know, the love that we feel for our romantic partners is not the same as the love we genuinely feel for our coworkers. It's all love, but of different sorts. So in Greek, there are different kinds of, there's romantic love, there's brotherly love, and each of those forms of love has its own name. The word Jesus actually speaks in this passage when he says love your enemies is agapon. And it needs a whole paragraph to translate it from Greek into English. It's a big idea. This is an active feeling of benevolence towards another human being. It's a deliberate choice and stance to go out of one's way to be good to another, to show kindness towards another, and to only ever want the best for another person. Agape says, in the words of William Barclay, he's a famous commentator on the Bible, no matter what another person does to us, we will never allow ourselves to desire anything but that person's highest good. That's a tall order. And look, we know ourselves enough to say we cannot love our enemies the same way we love the people near and dear to us. But maybe that tall order of a definition makes this a little easier. In fact, maybe we can set ourselves to seek only good for other people. Maybe that's a way around the emotional feeling we don't have towards enemies is the actions we can take towards enemies, no matter what they do to us. This sort of agape love, I think it will involve our hearts, but it maybe doesn't even start there. Agape is a mindset and an act of will. It's a series of decisions that we reach only by the grace of God and the work of Christ in us. It's not only doing the right thing, it's doing the extra thing. And I say that because I have taken apart these words Jesus says, and I've thought long and hard, why these examples of only loving those who love you back, of only lending when you get something in return? And I realize what Jesus is commanding has to be something extra, because all the usual things have no special grace in them. That's what Jesus says. If we only lend, hoping to be later paid back, what special grace is in that? I mean, those things do seem pretty well and good compared to how other people do it. They seem better than the way some humans behave. But when you compare ordinary good to how God does it, well, then maybe you're hearing. Maybe you are beginning to hear and see how compassion really is this above and beyond demand. How it's the exercise of every muscle in us all at once. How Christian love isn't a thing that we simply fall into. Though, sure, okay, we might and can fall in love with Jesus. But that Christian love, divine love, is something we choose again and again. An attitude we adopt, a stance we maintain, a set of actions we follow. If we were to work, just we in the room, just these people in the room, if we were to put into practice only this much of this one sermon from Jesus, to agape our enemies, to only will and enact good towards those who hate, curse, mistreat us, I think that alone is enough to transform families, communities, church, even entire countries. But of course, no part of doing it is easy. That's the human condition that gets in the way of all that transformation. We can get better at doing hard things with practice, and if we stay in practicing communities who are also trying alongside us. But still, working for the good of those who actively work against us just pushes every human button. It raises all the defenses. It pushes out our notions of what love is and what love is for. I don't really have an answer on how to be compassionate like your Father is compassionate. I don't really have like 3 steps that we should all take. This is not prescriptive for me. It's just inspirational, because I'm someone who knows already it will take all that I have and more than I think I have to give. But I also know this: it will give back. Loving our enemies also gives back the pieces of us that a fragmented world has scattered. Loving our enemies is not without its rewards. Jesus says so right here in Luke chapter 6. And also, I have seen and heard it. In my own life, I've seen and heard I want to wrap up by telling you some things about my dad, who died 2 years ago. And I'm going to do this unscripted because I wasn't really sure I could stop and write it down. Every time I tried to, I kind of got stuck in the details. So we'll see how this goes. In 1968, my dad was 18 years old and in college, and he dropped out. And he went and joined the Marines without telling his parents. He wanted to serve his country. He didn't necessarily want to go to Vietnam, is how he explained it to me, but he kind of thought he owed the USA some time in Vietnam. That's what was going on at the time. His parents tried to get him out of it, what he had done, but he stayed committed. He went to the Marines. He got all shot up. He spent a year in Australia and in Germany getting patched back up enough to get back to the States and walk on his own and be functioning again. About a year later, he met my mom. They quickly got married, and about 5 years later, I was born. Let me tell you that back in the day, there was no treatment for PTSD. I don't even know if it was a thing in the 70s. I don't know if we knew that term, but I'll tell you that my Vietnam vet father did not ever get mental therapy for PTSD, and he felt it. So I grew up in the house where my grown-up was putting himself back together again. And he did a great job, he really did. But war leaves its scars. When I was 5 years old and my brother was 2 years old, my dad got cancer. He was really young, really healthy, even after being shot multiple times. But the cancer came from exposure to chemicals in Vietnam. And it was pretty gruesome. He lived for a year at MD Anderson. He had 9 surgeries. They thought he was going to die many, many times. So in about 1978, they declare him cured of cancer. And from 1978 to 2022, we got some bonus years. We got a lot of bonus years of Papa Jim. Cancer, in the end, the same cancer came back and took his life. So I'll say that of all the many wonderful things I could tell you and the many quirky, funny things, I'll just point out some of the bad to get to the good. My dad had some simmering prejudices that lasted due to his time in war. I'm not proud to tell you this, and I pray that you'll take it without offense, but he was never really comfortable with the idea of, for one thing, international adoptions. It used to just bother him. And my mom and I really didn't understand, and it's taken me years to understand why he was bothered, because as a kid, I didn't see what he saw. And he would just say things like, I'm just not sure that, those people are like us. I'm just not sure that those people need to be here. Maybe they need their own people to take care of them. There was very much a them and us in my dad's world towards anybody who looked like the combatants in Vietnam. That's just a thing that was. All right, then we fast forward a long stretch of time into the grandfather years when everything sort of blossomed and softened and opened. My dad's time as a grandpa was also the time that he felt called into ministry. So as a pretty old dude, already with gray hair, he became a youth minister first, and then he went back to school and became a minister in the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. And then he was elected to the board of the ministry council of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church in America, and he was sent to Laos and Cambodia. I know, I laughed out loud when he told me I was going. I was like, God is funny. So the first time he goes, he's like, I'm going to do it, but I'm not flying through Vietnam. And he made all these elaborate plans. Like, he went all over the world, I'm not exaggerating, to avoid certain airports and countries. If it was an airport he'd been in as a Marine, he didn't want to touch foot on it again. If it was any place he had been as a Marine, he didn't want to go. So first trip, he comes back, and at this point, he's not living in the same state as me, so I don't see my dad all the time. But I did notice, he has some great stories about this trip. It obviously made him very happy. It was meaningful, and he brought back tons of treasures. He brought my kids these wooden puzzles that were like carved animals, but you pull the pin out, and the whole animal falls apart, and you have to reconstruct the animal. He was fascinated by them. I probably own a dozen silk scarves. My mom had so many makeup bags and tote bags and embroidered things. My dad's mom was a recipient of many wonderful treasures, and it was such a good time. My dad did such a good job that they asked him to go back. He went for a total of about 4 weeks over 3 years. And the last time he went to Laos and Cambodia, he traveled back via Texas because he wanted to visit my family. So I go to pick him up at the airport. And he's got like a normal suitcase, like a normal human. And then he has this ratty, like olive green, falling apart knapsack situation. And I say, what is that? I mean, it, kind of smelled like it was a whole thing. He goes, that's my Marine sack that I got when I was 18. I take it when I go overseas. He still had the same backpack. And so this was my dad's situation. Everything he needed for 10 days in a foreign country was in a backpack, an Army green, Marine green backpack that said Barry in a little sticker on it. And then everything that he bought to support the local economy was in the ginormous real person suitcase with the spinner suitcase with the wheels and the handle, right? And everything he bought, I come to find out, came from a street vendor. Everything he bought came from him making friends with someone or asking his local host, who needs money today? And then he would just go buy stuff. This from the guy who owned like the same pair of slippers for 45 years. I think his clothes were mostly held together with duct tape by the ends. He did not buy things for himself, but he bought lots of treasures overseas. So fast forward again, several years, a year after he died, I probably still would not have cleaned out his closet, except that we were selling his house. So I had to go clean out the place that was just his, right? The one part of the home that was just Papa Jim. Nobody else used that particular closet. So there's lots of clothes and all the things you would expect in a closet. And then there at the back on a shelf, next to a pair of worn-out cowboy boots, really too worn to wear, but not thrown away, let us all note, there's a stack of things. The stack of things were 3 worn-out Bibles, like the spines were falling off. He had used them so much, but he did not throw them away. There was a dog-eared copy of Hank the Cowdog. There were loose pictures of all three of my children when they were toddlers, and they were pictures that he had specifically asked me to send him when he lived in Tennessee and we lived in Texas. He kept the pictures. Also, there was a small framed print, like a watercolor print from a street artist in Cambodia that was like a man on a pedicab. He kept the print. And then there was just one loose single photo of my white-haired old man dad surrounded by very small brown-skinned children. Just shockingly white hair and pale skin and these beautiful kids. Every one of them looked nothing like my father, and everyone in the photo is laughing. Sometimes on the way to healing the world, we heal ourselves. Something in my dad was different at the end of his life. By the end, something had shifted in a monumental way. And all he had was love for his actual, literal enemies. And that, my friends, is the best good news I have to share today. Amen.